Today, we're going to talk a little bit about conversion tracking in the Google ecosystem. And we'll talk about what conversions are. We'll talk about each of these Google ecosystem platforms or tools you see here and what each of them does. And we'll talk about some best practices for setting up your conversion tracking. So, what is a conversion? My answer would be it's any significant action or event that occurs on your website that we care about measuring. So, obviously, things like a click or a view, most of the time you can just track that in your web analytics. It's not really significant enough to say it's a conversion. But if it's something really significant, like they filled out a web form, or maybe they watched a certain video, or they scrolled down really far on one of your pages, like 90% of the way down, that might be something you want to designate as a conversion. Cool thing is, though, you can set up almost anything as a conversion on your website with the right tools. So briefly, if this flowchart here is set up to measure how conversions are set up and how they propagate through your system, um, even if you don't have Looker Studio or Google Ads or even Tag Manager set up, this video will still make sense because you're going to want to understand what those things do and how they all work together. Typically, you'd set up a conversion in Google Tag Manager. You could run reports on it in Google Analytics and Google Ads, and you can even run reports on it in Looker Studio. But there's other ways to approach this. This is kind of the way we would approach it if we had all four of these set up. So what is Google Tag Manager? That is something that allows us to manage all of our Google tags and our event tags. So with Google Tag Manager, its only job in life is to manage tags, just like the name implies. So for example, if you have Tag Manager, you don't need to place a Google Analytics tracking pixel on your website or a Google Ads tracking pixel on your website, because if you have those tracking pixels set up, you can put them directly into Google Tag Manager directly, and then Google Tag Manager you only need to put that pixel or that code on your website. So it's a nice way, it's a cleaner and a more efficient way of managing all the tracking pixels that normally would take up a lot of space on your back end. This would be done just with the Google Tag Manager snippets that they give you. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is Tag Manager makes it really easy and intuitive to set up event tags so that when something happens, one of those conversion actions we talked about a minute ago happens on your website, we can now measure that the way we want to, have it fire an event, which we'll talk about, and then it'll, like I said, propagate through these other tools depending on how you have things set up. So let's talk about those details in a few minutes. This is a kind of a look at what you might see in Google Tag Manager when you're about to set up something like a tag. Next thing would be a Google Analytics here at the top right. That's really its job in life, is just to track website performance. It's to report on how long people were on different pages, which pages they visited, what path they took through your website. All things web analytics happen on Google Analytics. And again, you could have, if you're only going to have any one of these things set up, you could just have Google Analytics, and that would do a lot of good things for you, even without these other four. Same thing with ads. Technically, you could just have Google Ads set up by itself and not the other three there. But you'll see why as we go through this, you'll see why it's a good idea to have at least Google Tag Manager and possibly all four of these set up depending on what you're doing. So this is what a Google Analytics might look like. Again, this is just one view. You can build custom reports and different things. And Google Analytics will report on traffic, which is those web visitors coming to your website from any source, meaning they could have come from Facebook ads or digital ads or a direct visit or a referral visit from another website or organic search. All of those are tracked here within Google Analytics. Okay. Next thing we have is Google Ads. Now, its sole purpose in life is to manage your Google Ads campaign. So you can run reports on things like how many people clicked and how many people converted, but it's only going to show you data relative to traffic that came from Google Ads. So it will not show you traffic that came from other sources. If you want to find that, you're going to go back up and look at Google Analytics. But Google Ads is a subset of all the traffic, only that traffic that came from Google Ads. And this is what the console might look like when you log in. This is always subject to change based on Google's evolution over time, but some version of something like this you're going to see when you log in. And then Looker Studio is a product that Google bought a few years ago, and it's basically a way of doing reports, custom reporting. You can pull data in, again, from multiple sources: Google Ads, Google Analytics, third-party data products like digital ad products like Facebook or LinkedIn. It's a great way of just doing reports. So Looker doesn't come with any of that data, but you can pull that data in from these other products and build reports. So some folks have Looker, some folks don't need Looker. Depending on your needs, you might be able to get away with never using Looker at all. Depends on what you're doing. And this might be what you look like within what you see within Looker. Obviously, these might be templates, and if you click on one of those, you might customize it for your own data. So what are the key differences then, going back to our conversation, which is focused on conversions? What are the key differences around creating and tracking conversions among the Google ecosystem platforms? So going back to our model you see here, so in Tag Manager, we set up a conversion, but it's called an event. So the terminology is a little different. So in a Tag Manager, it's called an event. Okay, you set that up with an event tag. You define the tag. You define how the tag gets fired, under what conditions, and then what any kind of data we call parameters get passed along to the next thing in the chain, which in this case will be Google Analytics. What parameters are actually passed along. So you cannot go into Google Tag Manager and look up past historical tag firings. You would have to do that within a connected Google Analytics account, which is why you want to connect those. The reporting is all done in Analytics. This is all for setup purposes. But one of the great things about Tag Manager is you can set up and test your events. So you can actually set them up and test them in Tag Manager before they even go live to make sure that they're firing the way you want them to. And so that's a unique feature of Google Tag Manager. You really can't test events made up in these other systems here in the same way you can in Tag Manager. So again, best practice, definitely get Tag Manager if you have it, or if you have the inclination to get it, I definitely would get it. And by the way, these are all free products. Google Ads you have to pay for, in the sense that you have to pay for the ads, but everything else is free about this. So Google Analytics, these are also called events. So it's still not called a conversion yet. Remember, I'm going to tie this all together later, but essentially an event is a type of conversion. So think of it like a conversion. But in Google Analytics, we can either import those from Google Tag Manager, which is the best practice here, or you can even create events directly within Google Analytics 4 or GA4. Okay, so you can import them, or you can create them, or a combination of the two. And in terminology-wise, they're called events or they're called key events. So another thing that could be a little confusing is that in Google Analytics, let's say you had 10 events set up based on maybe what you built in Tag Manager over here. And then maybe 3 of those are really, really important to you. And we might call those key events. So you can toggle a little switch in Google Analytics. Now that becomes a key event, okay? Now, once it's a key event, it's kind of like, being made the king, it's a special annotation or anointation. Is that the right word? Being anointed, going from just regularly being an event to being a key event. Okay, so it's kind of like a promotion, if you will. You can promote or demote an event at any time to make it a key event or a not key event. But if you want to use that event in Google Ads, what I call propagating that forward, then you do need to promote it to a key event. And now I think Google has it set up to where if you try to import that event into Google Ads, it will automatically promote that to a key event for you within Google Analytics. Okay. So now in Google Ads, now we start calling them conversions. It's no longer called an event, it's called a conversion. Now here's some important points to remember. In Google Ads, it's only going to show you conversions that happen because of traffic that came from the digital ad traffic. So if you want to run an event report, you definitely want to do it in Google Analytics, okay? But if you want to run conversions, which are just another form of event, which is renamed a conversion in Google Ads, that's great. You can run those reports within Google Ads, but it's only going to show you the conversions that are happened in because of a Google Ads ad that somebody clicked on. And so you can either import the events from GA4, or you can also create those directly in ads. So one theme you might have noticed here is that Google is very flexible. You could create your event in Google Tag Manager. You could create it in GA4. You could even create your Google Ads events or conversion events in Google Ads. My recommendation is to build everything in Google Tag Manager, with a couple of exceptions, which we'll talk about. And these then are either called primary or secondary conversions. So in order to pull anything into Google Ads, it has to be a key event up here in Google Analytics. Has to be a key event. If you mark it a key event, you can import it into Google Ads. Once it's in Google Ads, you can mark it as a primary conversion or a secondary. Just like it sounds, primary are more important. Primary conversions are the ones that Google is going to use to optimize your campaign. It's going to use that data from a conversion that happened from a traffic that was sent via your Google ad. It's going to track that and call that a primary conversion. But a secondary conversion would also be a key event from Google Analytics 4. But with a secondary conversion, it's not going to be influencing the algorithm at all for Google Ads. It's just going to be something you're reporting on, okay? That brings us to, so you can run reports in Google Ads for these primary conversions. Now, brings us to the last piece, Looker Studio. Again, this is the reporting software. They're going to be called conversions in here as well when you're talking about Google Ads traffic. And those, you can either set it to conversions or all conversions. Now, that's something, a setting within Looker Studio. If you set it to conversions, it's going to bring in just the primary conversions, right? The ones that are the most important, the ones the algorithm is optimizing to. Or you can pull in all conversions, which is going to bring in the primary and the secondary from Google Ads right into Looker Studio. So you may have to watch this video a couple times. If you've done any of this before, it'll make more sense. If this is all new to you, it might still be confusing. But the point we're trying to make on these slides here is that what's called an event or a conversion changes over time from event to conversion as you go through. The types of conversions or events that can be brought from one tool to the next also varies depending on actions you took in that previous tool, okay? So those are kind of the takeaways. So finishing up here, let's talk about some common points of confusion. So again, an event versus a key event versus a conversion, it's essentially the same data but different labels, but the key event will always be a subset of events. So if you have 10 events, the most key events you could have would be 10, but probably you would have between 1 and 9, or even 0. You can never have more key events than there are events, okay? So because it's always a subset of events. Key events are like the special ones, the ones that matter a little bit more to you. And if it's a key event, you can then bring it into Google Ads as a conversion. And then once it gets into Google Ads, or if you get into Looker based on Google Ads reporting, it's also going to be called a conversion, okay? And conversions can be built, events can be built in Google Tag Manager or Analytics, and conversions can be built in Google Ads natively or be imported from Google Tag Manager as well, or Google Analytics as well, I should say. Now, some events show in GA4, but not Google Ads. Why would you see an event in GA4 but not in Google Ads? Because, like I said earlier, if the visitor did not come from clicking as a result of clicking on one of the ads in your campaign, then it will not show up in Google Ads, but it still might show up in GA4. So any web traffic at all from any source, direct visit, referral, organic, Facebook paid, Facebook unpaid, Google, text ads, whatever it may be, video ads, whatever the source was in Google Analytics, it will show up as an event. They call it firing an event or triggering an event. But in ads, only the ones that were imported and that came from a Google ad click will show up. So oftentimes the number of conversions in Google Ads will be a lot smaller than what you see in GA4 for those two reasons. Okay. And why doesn't the data always match across platforms? Partly because what I just said, but also because there are different details that you can set up when you're firing events that are beyond the scope of this video that have to do with how many times an event can fire based on one user visiting that page or that during that session, and that can change. So if you might have a lot more events firing in like Google Analytics 4, depending on how you have it set up in Google Tag Manager, but it might show fewer of those events in Google Ads, for example. So if the data doesn't match, there are several reasons for that, but that can be one of the reasons. And then some tips for your next steps in your analytics journey. Review your current conversion tracking setup. Review the tracking setup. If you don't have Tag Manager, I highly recommend you get that and connect it to your Google Analytics. If you don't have any of these, start with Analytics and Tag Manager as your two. Use consistent event naming conventions, meaning that you will actually have a pattern that you start using. You can name an event tag inside Google Tag Manager, whatever you want. It's really up to you. So I have a particular pattern that I use. Maybe I'll make a video on that in the future that I use, but it's something that makes intuitive sense. So even somebody who maybe wasn't privy to my thinking would still be able to kind of derive what that event basically means. Okay. And by the way, that event tag name can follow it all the way, not only from Tag Manager, but through analytics, through Google Ads, and all the way to Looker if you're doing Looker reports. So and then being consistent with those tag naming conventions it's doing a favor to yourself and to your team and your partners down the road. Now, the third one is you do want to try to do as much event creation in Google Tag Manager as you can. That's where you should be spending most of your time doing events. There are some exceptions that would probably be outside the scope of this video. There are some events, for example, like click to call and directions requests that happen based on certain things in Google Ads called extensions, which only happen in Google Ads. And therefore, those events actually have to be created within Google Ads. That's kind of an exception to the rule. So in Google Ads, you might have some events that you're importing from Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, but you may have some that just were created in Google Ads because of the nature of that event and how it has to be used or triggered based on how you actually have the physical ads set up. Okay. Next one is ensure consistent value assignment. So when you create these events, you can actually assign a dollar value to them. So you can set the currency like US or whatever country you're working with. And you can also set the value as $5, $10, $100, whatever that value is. The higher the value assignment, if you are attaching all this and propagating all this through to Google Ads, the higher the value assignment, the more Google Ads will place the value on that. And therefore, it will try to optimize the algorithm for Google Ads to get you more of the higher value ones. That's what it's going to focus more attention on those. And so you do want to it doesn't have to be perfect. You can either do an estimated value or it can be an actual value if you happen to know. If you're selling a product, for example, obviously you could probably figure out what the cost is going to be for that product. But I usually use it in a more relative sense of, some things are maybe worth 10 or 20 times what some other things are worth based on what I know how their value should be assigned. Couple more here. Another reason to use Google Tag Manager is you can actually test your conversions inside Tag Manager, meaning you can actually, as you set up tags, you can actually test them in what's called preview mode. And as you go through it, you can actually visually see which ones are firing based on clicking around on the website or taking actions on the website. That's a super handy feature. It's not just nice to have. You should definitely test all your tags that they fire properly and in the right situations, and don't fire in the wrong situations. You don't want any false positives either. That's really important for making sure that you have clean data down the road. And last tip we'll leave you with today is document your setup for future reference. So especially if you're not the only one looking at your data, if you have a marketing team, you have a CEO, you have executives, you have a CMO, website, webmaster, it could be any number of people who are interested in the website performance. You definitely want to record the different types of events that you have and make sure there's an explanation around how they were made. Now, somebody could technically go back and look at your Google Tag Manager and kind of infer what will be firing those different event tags based on how you have it set up. But it sure would save everybody a lot of time if you use that consistent naming convention that we talked about in number 2 there, along with documenting your setup for future reference. If you have questions, reach out to me here. You can post comments. Reach out to me at ambientarray.com, and we'll go from there. Good luck.